It's a pleasure to be here. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is James Herbert. I'm the president of UNE, and I'm just really delighted to be here tonight to welcome you to the second in this Spark Business series. This is a series put on by our College of Business, led by the amazing Dean Norm O'Reilly, poor chooser of music, but otherwise all-around awesome guy. Dean O'Reilly joined the university, I don't know, how long has it been now? About a year or so? Year and a half, okay. Seems like he's been here a decade in terms of all that he's done in that short time. So partnering with our faculty, he is doing amazing work. We've established 6 new majors in the college, 3 new centers in that short time, and the reach and impact of the college is already just amazing. And our applicants for the coming year are looking very strong in the college, so I'm just very pleased. And I've been asked to note that that Malinda Gagnon and Brian Gagnon unfortunately can't be with us tonight. They were scheduled to be here to moderate tonight's session, but they're dealing with an unexpected medical issue, and I know you all joined me in wishing them well. So they weren't able to be here tonight, but in their absence, we're fortunate to have 2 members of the Uprise team, and that is Nate Nappy, the Senior Director of Business Development, and Kyle Peterson, Director of Services for Uprise Partners. And you'll meet them and our other panelists in a moment, but for now, let's give our friends from Uprise Partners and the rest of our panelists a warm nor'easter welcome. So thank you all very much for being here. And thank you all for coming as well. I see many professional staff and faculty, and especially students from the university here, and I understand there's a lot more watching online as well. So thank you all for being with us. The Spark series is intentionally designed to bridge the gap, to connect our students, what happens in the classroom with what happens outside the classroom in partnership and industry partnerships in the real world. And this is something that fits really perfectly with our emphasis on experiential learning at UNE. We really try not merely to have students do good work in the classroom and then go do good work outside the classroom, but to marry those two together in a meaningful way. And we provide tons of opportunities for students in terms of internships and study abroad experiences and research. A few fun facts: our students study abroad at 4 times the national average. 41% of our students do meaningful research with faculty. I'm not talking about little classroom projects and stuff like that, but publishable research with faculty members. So we have, and then we have almost all of our students already, and it soon will be all of our students because we've planted a flag and made that a requirement, do meaningful work experiences integrated with their plan of studies at UNE. So we're always trying to bridge that gap. But in addition to sending students out in the real world for part of their education, we're also trying more and more to bring our partners here to the university. And so that's what tonight represents, and that's what indeed this whole series represents, and I'm just very, very pleased about that. So please consider this your home away from home. Come see us anytime, participate, come to sporting events, we have all kinds of things going on any given week. And if you go to une.edu/news, you'll see those things, and you're always welcome. So tonight's event, titled The Business of Cyber Defense, How Leaders Prepare for and Recover from Cyber Threats, will shed some light on a very, very timely topic. I know one that keeps me up at night. In today's digital world, cyber attacks occur every 39 seconds, and more than half of all businesses report being targeted by a cyber attack just last year alone. So it's very, cybersecurity is something that weighs heavily on any leader, and as I said, certainly on me. Our moderator, Nate, who I mentioned, comes from Uprise Partners. This is a company that was recently founded, I think in 2017, and in Bethel, Maine. It's headquartered right here in Portland, Maine, which is wonderful, and they've become a national leader in cybersecurity solutions to meet the unique needs, especially of small and mid-sized businesses. And we have other panelists who represent many other Maine companies. I'm not going to steal Nate's thunder by introducing them myself, but I'm very grateful that they're with us as well. So I would like to introduce Nate. In his role at Uprise, Nate works closely with business leaders to align technology with their strategic goals. And the goal of Uprise, in a nutshell, is to have technology be be a boost to the bottom line, to be a boost to the business operations rather than a roadblock, rather than a hindrance, which often is the way it's seen. So without further ado, Nate Nappy. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, sure. Thank you for the kind introduction, James. I'm thrilled to be here with you all this evening. I'm Nate Nappy with Uprise Partners, and happy to step in for Malinda Gagnon, Uprise Partners CEO. She's prepared the following remarks regarding the business of cybercrime. Let's start with a number, $10.5 trillion. That's the reason we're here today. That's the reason cybercrime, ransomware, data theft, fraud is happening at such a staggering pace. It's estimated that this year alone, cybercrime will generate $10.5 trillion. That amount rivals the GDP of entire nations. In fact, if cybercrime were a country, it'd have the third largest economy in the world, right behind the United States and China. That's why cybercriminals are so motivated. It's not just private actors in dark basements like we might typically envision. It's also state-sponsored groups with significant resources and strategy behind them. These attackers are sophisticated. They have advanced tools that are more powerful, more automated, and more affordable than ever before. Their methods are clever, patient, and designed to exploit one human truth, one common truth, and that would be human behavior. Nearly 90% of all data breaches happen because of human error. That error may be as simple as clicking on a malicious link in an email, or perhaps it's more analog. A finance team member gets a phone call. The voice on the other end of the phone has just enough information to sound legitimate, perhaps like a customer. And that one shared piece of information opens the door. And from there, the attacker builds a complete picture. That is social engineering. Piecing together fragments of data to unlock access to systems, accounts, and ultimately, your organization. This is why technology alone is not enough. You need defense in depth, smart systems that can identify threats, isolate suspicious activity, and shut it down immediately. You need experts who can analyze those alerts, distinguish between real threats and false positives, and adjust your defenses accordingly. So today, we're going to talk about one of the most damaging types of cyber attacks, ransomware. A ransomware attack is when an attacker gains access to your systems, encrypts your data, and demands payment, often in cryptocurrency, to release it. It can halt operations, cripple trust, and cause irreversible loss. We're fortunate to have with us today a business owner who has actually lived through a ransomware attack. He'll share what happened, what it cost, and what he learned. We'll also hear from experts who have stood on the front lines to discuss how to prepare, respond, and recover should the worst happen. Because while cybercrime may be a $10.5 trillion industry, our collective defense starts right here with knowledge, collaboration, and vigilance. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. First, we're honored to have Paul White, right to my left, CEO of the Paul White Company, with offices in Portland, Maine, and Newmarket, New Hampshire. The company is the largest commercial flooring contractor in New England. Their clients include well-known names such as LL Bean, IDEX, Hannaford Brothers, and the University of New England. As CEO, Paul is responsible for guiding the company's strategic direction and takes pride in cultivating a positive company culture. Next, we have Cody Braunscheidel, right next to Paul here. Cyber Incident Manager of CFC Response. Cody leads CFC's frontline response team in the US, where he and his team handle a wide range of security incidents, including ransomware cases firsthand. Cody began his cybersecurity career with the US Department of Defense, spending 9 years mitigating internal threats and nation-state level attacks. He went on to lead over 600 incident response cases at Tetra Defense and later Arctic Wolf, helping organizations recover from complex breaches impacting tens of thousands of systems. Next, we have Goodine at the far end here. insurance advisor at Chalmers Insurance Group, where he helps organizations across multiple industries navigate complex exposures, including cyber risk. With over a decade of experience in commercial insurance, Luke specializes in consultative risk management, technical advisement, and proactive mitigation planning. Luke emphasizes regular communication and open dialogue as essential pillars of a successful risk management and insurance program. And pinch hitting tonight for Malinda Gagnon, CTO of Uprise Partners. We have Kyle Peterson, right here in the middle, Senior Director of Uprise Partners. Kyle is responsible for Uprise's Network Operations Center services, overseeing proactive monitoring, incident response, and infrastructure management for Uprise's clients. Kyle specializes in email security, security compliance, disaster recovery, with a focus on helping organizations prevent disruptions and maintain business continuity. Please join me in welcoming our fantastic panel tonight. So, Paul, I would love to start with the incident that occurred at your company. And before we really dive into the questions here, I just wanted to say it's really admirable that you're open to sharing your story in the first place. It's something that I wish more business owners were open to sharing. Many would just tuck it under the rug, but it's there's power in sharing the story and transparency here. So how did you first hear there had been a breach, and what was that moment like? What happened, and how did your team actually respond?
On October 12th of last year, I was getting ready to play golf and got a call from our inside IT person who said we'd been hacked by European extortionists, and they had tied up all our data in-house and our virtual servers. And that was followed up by our IT contractor, who shocked me by almost being in tears because this was a terrible breach and all our computers had basically been tied up. We assessed the damage over the weekend. There was a lot of anxiety. What exactly did this mean? It wasn't just a typical email hack, which we had been through before. It was not a big deal. All our computers were tied up and our data was completely gone. Anxiety about would we be able to pay bills, how much personal information from our team members was compromised, customer information, pricing strategy, exactly what did this mean? So there was quite a bit of anxiety over the weekend and for a few days beyond that, that we just didn't know exactly what this meant. We did get a support system in from Luke. We, on a flyer, had signed up for cyber insurance. It was a 4-minute discussion, and Luke actually talked us into paying for it. It was a $5,000 policy with $1 million coverage, which will probably come close to spending between damage to the company, hardware, and lost time. But they were very good about putting a response together so that we could kind of mitigate and see what exactly it meant. Within a day or so, we found a ransomware note saying they wanted 26 Bitcoin, which were $66,000 a piece, just under $1.7 million to unencrypt or provide disencryption?
A key to unlock.
A key, there you go. A key to unlock our software. And so that was really exactly what had been tied up. Became clearer after a while. It was really down to 3 major parts of our business. We do stone and quartz countertops. They had wiped out all the data that we had for inventory, which means 300 or 400 slabs in stock. We photographed them all before we cut them up. That was all gone. So that means rehandling, pulling all that out, and rephotographing. It probably takes a half hour per piece. That was the smallest part. They had also encrypted 2 years' worth of our estimates, and that's about $250 million worth of pricing gone. So if you can imagine doing a painting or writing a book and you have one copy and somebody burns it and it's completely gone, that was the extent of the damage for 2 years' worth our main estimating department. And they also tied up about 4 months worth of the data that we put together to create the estimate. So the damage was pretty extensive.
And in terms of paying the ransom, that's always a big question when something like this happens. Would love to kind of understand how you were thinking about it, the decision you made, and why.
Well, we did have coverage up to a certain amount. We did not have 26 Bitcoin just laying around to pay it. The research that we had done and the advice that we had gotten is not everything is going to come back perfectly, and it's not going to be immediate. But based on 7 figures worth of payment, the team decided that we didn't want to encourage the behavior of this illicit activity, and we would rather spend the extra time and spend some of that money, even if it was in-house, towards recreating what we had. And there was also the confidence of knowing that whatever we did have would be done accurately. It wouldn't be corrupted by the people that had taken it over. So it really was a rallying point, and it was cool to come out of the conference room with everybody saying, you know, the people can go pound sand. We're going to create the information inside ourselves and weather the storm.
And it's, I mean, if you do pay, you're basically, you're enabling a criminal enterprise, right? So I think
Absolutely.
It's admirable to make that decision despite the additional effort to remediate those issues.
Yeah, we thought there was a lot of honor in it. The flip side is there's a tremendous amount of stress that if somebody calls you for a $2 million project that you were working on the week before, and they said, hey, we want to make some adjustments to it, and your work is gone, and you have to start over. And for us to create an estimate, that could be 4 weeks for an estimator just grinding on that, and they want answers now. So we do think there was some project loss and even margin loss to a certain extent because we couldn't answer questions as quickly as we had hoped.
And I mean, in terms of the total financial impact, can you give us a sense up front and down the line what that's kind of shaken out to look like?
The consulting and software was in the low 6 figures, and the hardware. We had to replace some servers. We created cloud-based data storage systems, which are not in-house, and they're a lot more difficult to corrupt. They're a lot safer. That was probably in the low 6 figures. We're still weighing out because we price jobs and they can take a year or two to come back in. So the financial impact, there's no limit on when we can go back to file a claim with discussions that we talk with the insurance companies. But we do have to document it, and it'll drag out well into next year before we have our arms around the whole figure. It'll be close to what we're insured for, I'm sure.
And again, Paul, just a lot of respect for you coming up here and sharing your story. I think there's a lot of power in having this conversation and being open about it because it's something, again, most business owners want to sweep under the rug. So just educating people on the realities of it all. Just want to commend you for that.
Yeah. Happy to help out.
And Cody, I'd like to move over to the anatomy of a cyber attack. So what's really happening behind the scenes, and what's kind of the attack chain, if you will, when something like this happens?
Absolutely. So the anatomy of a cyber attack, it starts with a vulnerability, right? Now, everybody thinks, well, this couldn't happen to me. I'm a small business owner. These guys are after big fish. They're after Toyota, Jaguar, all the companies you see on the news. When in reality, these threat actors are just combing the internet for open vulnerabilities. Now, when they find a vulnerability, what they do is sometimes what we refer to as an initial access broker will gain access, and then they'll sell that access to a ransomware group. These groups are starting to do that more internally these days. But what happens is they gain access to your environment, and the first thing they want to do is they're going to do some recon. Who do we got here? And it's going to be very quick. These attacks are like smash and grabs. They're not looking for the quality, they're looking for quantity up front. Now, immediately what they're going to do in the attack chain is they're going to see if you have a backup software in place. They're going to find that backup software and they're going to delete them as quickly as humanly possible. then they're going to lock up all of your data. Now, while they're locking your data, they're also stealing data from you. And that's what we refer to as double extortion. So even if you have viable backups that they couldn't find, they still have data to hold over your head. So that's the attack chain itself of the actual cyber attack. And the last part that the threat actors do is they drop what Paul referred to as the ransom note, which is the readme of, hey, contact me on this sketchy dark website here, and let's start our conversation. So that's really the anatomy of the threat actors portion of the cyber attack.
And I mean, in terms of where these bad actors tend to originate from, can you give us a sense of where in the world they're typically coming from?
Absolutely. So as Paul mentioned, he mentioned the group that impacted his company was from Europe, and I would say Eastern Europe is predominantly where what I'm going to refer to as the head of the dragon lives. Now, the reason they reside in Eastern Europe is those are non-extraditable countries, right? Interpol doesn't have a lot of reach into those countries. They operate on a platform called ransomware as a service. So what that means is there's a conglomerate, a group that runs an organization, and they hire affiliates, and those affiliates are worldwide. You can see in the local news there was just an arrest made in France. A couple ransomware actors affiliated to a group in Russia. They can't touch the gentleman in Russia that they're affiliated to, but the 3 individuals were arrested because of that. So primarily we're seeing them come out of Eastern Europe. Those are the non-nation state level actors. Then of course you have the nation state level actors coming out of North Korea, China, et cetera.
And I mean, that's interesting. And just the human element of it all, I think, is a really important piece to hit on, because these are human beings. And we'd just love to get your take on kind of the people behind these attacks, if you could speak to that, Cody.
Absolutely, happy to. So as part of my role, I negotiate with these groups. I'm just over 600 negotiations, so I've talked to a lot of these criminals. There is a human factor to them. They're people, just like everyone in this room. They have 9-to-5 jobs. This is not their day job. They are not the people sitting in Guy Fawkes masks with big dark hoods, typing at their keyboards in the basement. These are normal people just sitting on their couch, researching how to do this. And AI is making it easier for them. It's making it easier for us to stop as well. But these are just people. So when we're having these conversations, you have to realize that they're just another person on the other end of this, and they're in it for financial reasons. They had nothing against Paul. Well, I can't say that for sure.
There's great comfort in that.
But it's nothing against the business they're targeting. They're opportunistic, and really they're just financially motivated.
And I mean, in terms of what a cyber incident response team looks like, who's actually involved in responding to these attacks, could you break down what those roles look like, who gets involved?
Absolutely. So when it comes to an incident response, it's a lot larger scale team than most people would think. Typically, when you think of a cyber attack, you just think, okay, I'll bring my IT team in, we'll remediate, and we'll get back to work. But in reality, what you're bringing in is you're bringing in a team of professional incident responders, someone to manage the incident. You're bringing in a team of business resumption engineers to help get the company back up and running. You're bringing in a team of forensic analysts to figure out the who, what, where, when, and why of the attack to ensure it can't happen again. You're going to bring in a team of threat hunters to make sure that there is no active threat in the environment itself. You're going to bring in a team, a legal team, because of course here in the United States we have a lot of data regulation law, and it varies state to state. So you do bring in an attorney to help you with any regulatory obligations as well. So that the team is quite robust when you're responding to one of these incidents.
It's quite a few folks getting involved.
Very much.
Lots of hands in the pot. And I mean, in terms of paying the ransom, it's a major debate, right? And we never want to feed these bad actors. It was certainly not the right, it was the right decision in your case, Paul, to not pay the ransom. Is there ever a case where it does make sense to pay the ransom? And could you explain maybe an example of what it might be?
Of course. Yeah. So the answer to that isn't so black and white. Paying a ransom, it goes into 2 buckets. So there's 2 reasons you would pay a ransom. The first reason you would pay a ransom is if the threat actor locked out all of your data, as they did with Paul, no viable backups, and you have no way to recreate that data. So thankfully for Paul, he was able to recreate that data, and that allowed him not to pay that ransom. There's some companies who have no option. They have to pay to get their data back. Otherwise, they're going to go out of business. And I've had the displeasure to be involved in incidents where I have seen businesses fold because of these attacks. Now, the second reason is the data suppression reason, right? So if you do have viable backups and you can bring your systems back online, if you have data that's going to be leaked onto the dark web, some companies look at that and say, well, I don't want this data leaked out there. An example that I like to use, so let's be honest, everyone in this room has their social security number somewhere on the dark web, I promise. I have myself in dark web monitoring. I'm out there 17 times. Now, you all are too, I promise. That being said, it's not so much the personal information, it is the intellectual property. Or a story that I like to tell is I worked an incident for a not-for-profit law firm, and they dealt with sexual abuse and child abuse cases. Now, they had all of that data stolen. In their mind, they knew they had to notify these individuals no matter what, but they made the conscious decision to pay the ransom so that data would not be posted immediately on the dark web, so they could allow the parents of these children to, be notified prior to any data being leaked. So again, it's not such a black and white answer, but there are some times where paying a ransom does make sense. It really is situationally dependent.
Appreciate you breaking that down, and it's certainly a complex question and varies situation to situation. And I mean, you've been involved in over 600 incidents like this, Cody. So are there any that really stand out, or any kind of stories you can share here?
It depends. Yes, there are plenty that I can share. Now, there are a couple. There's one that I like to share that shows the human element of these groups we're engaging with. This group was perpetrating themselves as an infamous group called Lockbit. If anyone follows ransomware like I do, but nobody probably does. They're very prolific, and the reason I bring this up, the Lockbit encryption tool, the tool they used to lock the files, was leaked a couple years ago, and we had a client who had been attacked by a fake Lockbit. We knew it wasn't real, but we negotiated. They needed the key to unlock their data, and we ended up paying the ransom. And after we paid the ransom, the individual that I'm speaking with sent a message back and said, "Thank you so much for paying this. I can now get out of Ukraine. I've been trying to escape to America. I promise I'll never do this again, and I'm sorry." Now, that's not forgiving what he did. He's a criminal, and I hope he did not make it over. But it does show that there is a human factor to this. We're dealing with real people on the other end, and we don't know their circumstances. So we do have to go into these cases, understanding that it's a person just like me sitting on the other end and respond to each case individually.
Certainly doesn't justify it, but it's interesting to hear about some of the reasons why these bad actors are launching these attacks, right? So, I mean, when I think about kind of proactively putting measures in place to prevent something like this from happening, but also responding quickly, why is having an incident response plan so important in a situation like this, Cody?
Well, time is of the essence in these matters, and that's for a few reasons, right? You have business interruption, and as Paul can probably attest, those costs are great. So you want to have an incident response plan because it's scrambling on the golf course is not a good feeling, I can assume.
No, not at all.
So, you want to have a plan to get the right team involved, and what we always recommend is the tabletop exercises. Run through this, and make sure your plan includes all of the right people, so you can have you don't need to know how to respond to an incident. You need to know the people who know how to respond to the incident. I think is most important.
Thanks for sharing that, Cody. I appreciate that. And shifting over from the anatomy of an attack to preventing that from happening beyond just the plan in terms of how you're going to respond, what can small business and medium-sized business owners do to proactively put measures in place to prevent something like this from happening to them?
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions is in order to avoid this, you need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on all this fancy hardware and software and everything like that. And that's absolutely great. It helps. But what really is more important is getting started at the basics. So things like having a strong password, having MFA, multi-factor authentication in place. And when you boil it down, you could even get to just training for your team, right? Adoption for a small business is really important. People may not like to take the 15-minute cartoon training, but it works. It really does work. And so what's really important is getting back to basics, starting at the core, doing that, and then you can really use that to leverage these really fancy tools that will help lock down your environment, secure it, and go from there. But really just starting with the basics and education is number one.
I mean, and in terms of if you're a small business owner that's maybe doing between 1 and 5 million a year in annual revenue, you're not this Fortune 500 massive company, right? If I was a small business owner, it's like, why would people want my data? Why is my data so valuable, and why would we be getting hit with a ransomware attack versus these large companies? Could you just kind of speak to why they sometimes end up in the crosshairs of these cyber criminals and what that looks like?
Yeah, and I think Cody hit on it a little bit, but they're not really looking for name brands all the time. They're looking for opportunities. So they're not going in looking for a certain dollar amount. It's usually not even a person looking. It's a bot that's scanning the internet, looking for these vulnerabilities, and then if they get a hit, they're going to start keying in on that. They're going to start looking in there. So to some extent, these smaller organizations are actually more appealing targets because they know, okay, this mom and pop shop probably doesn't have IT. They probably don't know what endpoint protection is or antivirus. They don't know how to patch their computer. They haven't restarted it in 5 years because they have a tab that's been open that they don't want to lose, right? And that's very real. So I think the biggest mistake people can make is think, I'm small, I'm not a target. I would say, again, to an extent, if you're a 2-person company, 50-person company, international, you have to take this seriously. So yeah, I think as small as you are, you could still be a target and have to do all the, like I said, do the basics. It is affordable in a sense, right? Because I think that's something we've heard a lot is, well, I'm small, I can't afford an IT person. I can't afford the monthly payment that I have to make for all of this. And a lot of the stuff is just built into the tools that you have on your computer, your desktop, whether you're using a Mac computer or Windows. There are a lot of tools there built in just to help.
So what I'm hearing is that if it's almost like, to use a castle analogy, if there's no moat and there's no high kind of fence around the castle, and the drawbridge is down, that's where the attackers are going to focus their time. So that makes sense versus these.
And even going back to some of the training and stuff, right? If your team doesn't know how to dig the moat properly or operate the drawbridge or lock the doors, right? You have all these tools and you're just not using them properly.
It's a great point. It's not just having the tools, it's how you're actually applying them to strengthen your defenses. So we hear the term in cybersecurity really frequently, defense in depth. But what does that actually mean, Kyle?
Yeah, it's a great concept. So defense in depth, to boil it way down, is just having layers of security. So there may be people out there that say, hey, I have a spam filter, so it's going to catch all the malicious emails. That is never going to happen. Emails are going to get through. Malicious attacks are getting more complex. So what this is defense in depth is saying, and I could just give you an example to kind of talk through it, is you get a spam email, so it bypasses your spam filter. Now you're relying on your security awareness. So you're hoping your team has taken those trainings and says, hey, I know that this is not a legitimate email. This looks malicious, this looks weird. But people get busy, right? They might click that email, go to the web page. Now they're entering their password. So now we fall back to the next layer, which might be multi-factor authentication, right? And then you can keep going down this line of, okay, maybe you approve that code, right? Now you might have something on your computer. So you have what's called EDR and MDR. So think like antivirus and more protections on the machine, right? And so we have to move away from, oh, well, I have a spam filter, all the way down to, we need to assume that at least one or more systems are going to fail, and you need to layer those on top of each other, so that if anything does happen, it'll get caught at one of those points.
So if I'm a small business owner hearing all of this, some of the horror stories that Cody just shared, what are some actionable steps I can take starting tomorrow? You know what I mean? To strengthen my defenses beyond what you just shared.
Restart your computer, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who haven't restarted their computer. But on a broader scale, develop incident response plan, disaster recovery plan. And what that does is when you're in the middle of an incident, and Paul, you just experienced this, it's chaotic, it's confusing, it's stressful. And developing those plans essentially creates a checklist for you that organizes that chaos. So really what you want to do is get that established up front, get it in place, understand who's doing what, who do I need to talk to, what is our action here? And then the biggest thing is testing that. So a lot of people think like a disaster recovery is like, oh, we have backups, we're fine. Well, Cody just said that's the first thing they look for really, is to get rid of the backups. So make sure those are in place, test those. But beyond that, test your plan. Do the tabletop exercise where you go through 4 or 5 exercises that are maybe, what do we do if we click a phishing link, all the way to what do I do if there's a ransomware event? Because I promise you, you don't want to be testing it while you're in the incident. You want to have a plan for that. So definitely develop those plans early.
Sounds like practicing the fire drills that we all went through in school is the move here from a cyber perspective. And so that hits on the incident response piece of it and why having that plan's so important, so critical here. What about a disaster recovery plan? Could you speak to that and some of those core components that business owners should be thinking about?
Yeah, and 2 key things you hear when you talk about disaster recovery is RPO and RTO. So recovery point objective and recovery time objective. So recovery point objective is how far back can we go to get our data, right? So if you do backups every day, ideally you are just losing maybe 24 hours of data. Obviously this is different depending on what the data is. But then the recovery time objective is how long does it take to get that back? A good example of that is if you have cloud-only backups and you're still on dial-up internet, it's going to take a few days to get that data down there. So really understanding early what your RPOs are and your RTOs are, that's going to help you set the expectation for your team of, hey, we're going through this incident. Here's what you need to expect. Here's what we're doing. We've tested it. We're putting the plan in action. So understanding that, and then not to get too technical, but just regarding backups and disaster recoveries, like I said, don't just assume they work. Nobody cares about backups until you need them. They need to be tested often, regularly. They need to be encrypted. Ideally, they're not stored only in your environment, because if that gets compromised, that's where they're going to look. But having some redundancy in your backups and in your data is really, really important.
Sounds like redundancy and actually testing backups is immensely critical here. Whole point of a backup is being able to recover quickly, and if it's not being tested, come game day, if it's not recoverable, that's obviously not the result anybody's looking for.
And immutable never means immutable. So there's immutable backup solutions, which means they can't be deleted. I can attest to you that that's not the case. So immutable doesn't always mean it.
Hate to hear that. And Cody, staying on yourself here. I mean, when you think about ransomware, these cyber attacks, most people are thinking about data loss, data encryption, and reputational damage. But is that truly the full picture here? Or is there other things like production systems, if you're, say, a manufacturer, or critical software components, or other things people might not be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when it comes to a ransomware attack, it affects, much more than just a business. So an example I always like to use is a hospital. Imagine, and this happens unfortunately all too frequently, but you'll have a medical provider that has been completely locked out of their systems. Right now, their desktops might work, but they have no access to their cloud architecture. They can't intake patients properly, right? So they're back on paper, or they can't, properly bill out the insurance. So people are receiving insane bills in the mail because they were down, when they were being on the intake. So there's a lot of downstream impact to a business from a ransomware attack, well outside of the encryption event itself. I mean, this can affect people's lives. One that I like to bring up often as well is financial institutions. We've had, credit unions that have been impacted, and people go in to get their paycheck cashed on a Friday, and the bank says, well, sorry, we can't. I mean, are you going to trust that bank with your business anymore? And it's not the bank's fault that they're in that situation, right? It's the criminal who perpetrated. But there is a lot of things. There's much to consider after a ransomware attack, well outside of the internal impact.
It's a lot to think about. And in terms of as threats are evolving in the cyber world, Luke, I'd like to move over to you and how insurance has really become a critical piece of the risk management strategy here, right? What's the single biggest misconception small business owners or mid-sized business owners have when it comes to cyber liability insurance, and why is it so important to clear that up?
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions with cyber insurance is if I have cyber, I'm all set. You kind of pack that up, put it on the shelf, and you're good to go. Really, we never want to get to the cyber insurance. The most important thing is that we're taking the preventative measures. We have an incident response plan in place. In listening to the good things that have been said here, when you look at an incident response plan, some of them, if you go online, they're like 40, 50 pages long. Nobody's ever going to read them. What we recommend is just initially putting something in place so that you have the right contacts, so that when there is a cyber incident, you call your agent, and then they're going to connect you with the cyber response team. Cyber response team needs to know who to speak with. And so we want to be able to connect that up, because the first 15 minutes are the most crucial when you have a cyber attack. So I encourage people to establish those parts up in front. Also, with the cyber policy, you want to make sure that it can flex in different ways. So with Paul, for instance, you want to make sure that you can pay a ransom if you have to. If you decide not to, and you want to take a different approach, are there different buckets of coverage that will flex with your business and that are specific to your business in the different ways that you can manage that response?
So, I mean, it sounds like it's not as simple as checking a box on that annual renewal when you're going through insurance coverages. And what are some different considerations that small and mid-sized business owners should be kind of taking under consideration? What should they be thinking about when it comes to different types of coverage, and how much is enough to provide a meaningful impact?
Right. So that's a tough scenario. Each business is going to look different, right? So you have to establish how long would it take us to get back on our feet in a worst case scenario. So I typically will look at the business income and extra expense, and that's going to cover lost profits during the time that you're down. And in order to really establish that limit, you have to have a good idea of how long would our business be shut down in that worst case scenario. It's important to discuss that on a case-by-case basis. There's no blanket answer to that. You also have the theory that if I have $2 million of coverage, I'm going to be ransomed for $2 million. But the truth is, once somebody's gotten into your systems, they have your financials, they know everything about you, they know exactly where to go, they know how to extort you. So again, it goes back to that response plan. It goes back to knowing how to react, handling it quickly, getting ahead of the game. One of the things that we talk about not all insurance carriers are created equal. If you have a policy that's put in front of you, ask the follow-up question. what does that response team look like? Once we're in the thick of this, we'll have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, but really a cyber policy is having a response team on a retainer, and that's how you should think about it. It's not as much about the buckets of coverage, it's really the guidance. And Paul, you can speak to this. As soon as it happened, I think I was eating pancakes with my family, and I got a phone call that said we had a cyber attack. 2 hours later, we had a war room set up on a Saturday. That's the kind of response that you want, because they do not happen at convenient times, and that's by design. So it's going to be a Saturday morning when you're caught off guard, right? And so you want to make sure that you have a response team that's willing to jump in and get their hands dirty, roll their sleeves up. I think by Monday, we had recovered 70% of the data. However, the 30% left was the most important, of course. But we were able to get ourselves up and ticking along by that Monday. So those are the follow-up questions to ask. The most cyber policies have very broad forms and broad coverage. They're going to check all the boxes. But what does that look like when the rubber meets the road, right?
And who's actually on the other end when something happens? It sounds like that is immensely critical. And also working with an insurance advisor that understands cyber liability insurance beyond just checking the box. So fantastic. And would love to hear from you, Cody, in terms of industries that get hit more frequently, or why that might be. Why? I know before we came up here today, you were sharing that your local feed store that has 3 laptops got hit with ransomware sometime recently, and they decided not to pay. So even feed stores with 3 laptops are getting hit. But why would an attacker target certain industries over others, and what are some of the most common industries that are attacked?
No, it's a fair question. So the threat actors are very opportunistic, right? If they find a vulnerability, they don't care if you're a feed store. They're going to encrypt you, and they're going to hope that you have the money to pay their ransom, right? So they are going for a volume approach. You do have groups that are targeting specific industries. There are groups out there that target specifically healthcare industries or education industries because they know the level of impact that can cause. So the likelihood of you paying to get back up and operational is higher. So, if you hit a hospital, they're more likely to pay because they have patients' lives to worry about, right? As awful as that sounds, people are targeting those types of groups. And again, the education industry is just the same. A school can't function. Imagine if all of your technology was just gone. You wouldn't be able to operate. So, the threat actors look at it as if you're more likely to pay them quickly to get back to operations. And the same goes, we actually have seen an uptick in local municipalities as well, where they're hitting towns themselves, police departments, things of that nature, because again, they believe that they'll get a quick turn because there's going to be a lot of public scrutiny on that. And I will say I'm happy to see that a lot of the towns are saying, nope, we're not paying this, and hopefully that's going to make them a harder target moving forward.
That's interesting to hear. And it's the thought of a police chief negotiating or just having these types of conversations with a bad actor is quite the vision.
We try not to let them in the room on that one.
Yeah. That's why we have folks like Cody here to handle those conversations, but just being involved in all of that, yes. So this concludes the panel discussion portion of the program. Would love to open this up to the audience. If you have any insights, questions that you would like to ask, we'll have a mic runner come over to you, and you can ask away.
I think it's important to mention, Nate, that the best question wins a bouquet of flowers in the back.
That is yes. So if you were on the fence about whether you were going to be raising your hand or not, we've got a beautiful bouquet thanks to CFC Response that'll be awarded to whoever has the most interesting insight or question here.
So I'm in a similar role to Luke in terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And one of the common pushbacks I get is I back my data up every day. I have a server in Florida that handles all this. And coming close at grabbing their hand and signing the paperwork for the cyber insurance, what what would you suggest that we say to those folks to push them over the edge to commit to some type of cyber coverage?
So, it's a really good question, and it's something that I actually deal with quite often, right? Are the people that are on the fence. So what I do is, everybody here knows of the big companies that have been attacked, right? Everyone can say, oh, the MGM attack, the Jaguar, Land Rover. Everyone can name those. What I often do is there's an open source website, and you can pull that up, and it updates every single day, and it shows every victim that's been impacted that day. And if you open today's page, you'll see 50 new victims. And you won't be able to recognize a single company name from that page. And what I'm trying to portray is it's not a probability of if anymore. It's when, right? So you're not being targeted, and that's what I always tell the business owner is it's not that they're targeting you, but if any of your software ever has a 0-day vulnerability, something that is just unknown, you're automatically a target whether you want to be or not. So that's usually how I try to help push people towards the purchasing a policy, because it just makes sense. You see all of these businesses that are hit on a daily basis, and then they can resonate and say, okay, well, wow, I mean, this is 50 just today, and tomorrow there'll be a new 50 up there, right? And kind of impress upon them that, well, you probably don't want to join that group of 50, and if you do, you want to have a cyber policy to back you. So does that answer your question?
More or less, yeah.
I was amazed by the team that we got to respond to the issue, because there's disclosure laws that you have to comply with, state and federal, for your employees, for your customers, for your vendors. There are researchers trying to figure out exactly where the leak was, people immediately trying to figure out what data was encrypted. I had no idea what we bought when we spent the money on the policy, but I was amazed at the service.
I think one thing, too, is I'll often share the average cost of a cyber incident. And as Paul attested to today, he's close to maxing out the policy, and that's common across the industry, right? So show them how often this is happening at the cyclic rate that it is happening, and let them know that you'll definitely want someone in your court, because it's not just the business of restoration anymore. It as Paul mentioned, it's the regulatory on the back end, right? Imagine a small chiropractic practice gets hit. There's a lot of HIPAA there, and there's a lot of notification, right? And if you don't have a policy to back you there, you're going to be in trouble. And even if it's a non-regulated entity, right? They have employees, and those employees will need credit monitoring and notifications, and without a policy, that gets expensive very quickly.
I want to win that bouquet. No. Actually, something interesting that you mentioned, Paul, and maybe for Cody to talk on is the tail, right? So we talk about the incident that happens, but then what about the after effect, right? So a year or 2 years down, are there maybe certain industries that you say, hey, certain industries have a much longer tail to recreate the data, where you're doing quotes and proposals and working on with clients or future ideal clients? Are there certain aspects of that, or industries you say it's 2-3 years down the road where this claim is still ongoing, and before you sort of hit that final, the finale of it and be done?
Absolutely. So if you look at there's a couple things that tail, right? You have the regulatory tail at the end, right? So if there's any HIPAA regulated entity, you are going to be in a notification phase for a long time until you get all of their states of record and everything sorted out, and that can go for a while. Now, to get that information, you have to know who was impacted. To get who was impacted, you have to go through a tedious process known as data mining, where there's a phased approach. You have an AI essentially, or a program looking through all the data to pull out anything that would be constituted as PII, PHI, et cetera. And then you actually have a human that has to go through all of that data, spit out to say, this is your notification population, and then you have to notify them, and that can take a long time. Now, from a business continuity standpoint, right, I always lean towards the architecture firms when it comes to the back end, right, because there is so much data, and I think you could probably relate with this, right, is you have just these large files, proposals, estimates, blueprints, things of that nature. it's impossible to recreate those overnight. I mean, you are going to be forever, filling those out. And oftentimes we see companies bringing in extra staff and seeing if the policy will cover that to help recreate this data. I have a friend of mine who was unfortunately a victim at an architecture firm, and we are a year and a half later, and he is still rebuilding data. Their business is functioning, but he's still in the process of rebuilding data.
So your friend, your feed store. So don't hang out.
Don't
with
hang
you.
out
Is
with
that
me.
what you're saying?
Nope, you're right.
Don't get too close to Cody, I guess.
Everybody back up.
Yeah, so my question is, how has AI changed the game both for the people going for the security and attacking and also the people trying to defend themselves? And a follow-up to that, has AI or just in general throughout the years with the increases in technology, has that changed what businesses are being attacked more, or now, some businesses being attacked not at all and now are being attacked because of how regularly available resources are to figure out how to go with these attacks?
That's a really good question. I'll take it if that's all right. I think it's the best analogy to use is it's like the space race, right? They have AI, we have AI, right? So as advanced as they're becoming, our countermeasures are also coming equally as advanced, right? So our endpoint detection and response tools are now injected with AI. I mean, everything is, right? I think my toothbrush has AI. But they are becoming more advanced, and as Kyle mentioned, what they're doing is they're using AI to find these vulnerabilities now. So it's no longer a person scouring the net for these vulnerabilities. They're making bots that are AI powered and backed that are finding these vulnerabilities for them, and that's allowing them to, at the cyclic rate, find people who are exploitable, and then a human goes in and exploits them. Now, I will say they also are using AI to talk to us because, of course, there's a little bit of a language barrier there. So we always know when we're being talked to by AI. I'm not sure that AI itself has stopped or increased the attacks on specific industries. But what I can say is the industry itself is evolving. Threat actors are evolving, and we're evolving with it. And it's kind of a day-to-day, they get one step ahead, we get one step ahead, and it's going to be that forever until there's no more humans involved and it's just computers fighting computers.
Yeah, and I think to your point too about the AIs are talking to us, I think that human element comes in because that is how a majority of the breaches happen. It isn't always a vulnerability. It is somebody getting that email, entering their credentials, but it's now getting to the point where you get that phone call and you say hello, they have your voice, then all of a sudden you get a call from your CEO and it sounds just like your CEO asking for whatever it is, Visa gift cards, or they need you to go run over here and do something. So over the last few years, that's gotten way more advanced. Whereas before you could probably spot it out pretty well, or it's still a text message sometimes, but the actual voice, people are still getting caught off guard by that. But I think AI has advanced very far in that sense.
It certainly helped their grammar. I mean, if you look at some of the phishing emails, it's well scripted and oftentimes pretty polite stuff. I'm sure that you see on the back end, which is interesting.
If you see a bunch of randomly bolded words in the email, it's not real.
This question is for Paul. Do they know where your vulnerability was at that time? And have you changed anything since then in your security measures?
We think the initial entry came through a single user that clicked on an email and allowed them to unleash high-powered software to find all the vulnerabilities within our company. We've gone back to the IT companies and invested a lot of money in virtual cloud-based servers that are a lot more secure than the old hardware that we had in-house. We're running safety training with everybody to try to find spam emails. First one we ran 2 weeks after we got hit, 6 people tripped and got snagged in the training. And we have 70 computers, so it was pretty scary how behind the times we were. So we've done that. Yeah, a lot of different measures. Shutting your computer off over the weekend. I've left mine on for years. Didn't realize that that's kind of a biggie. And there's a whole checklist of stuff that we've entered into the company to try to get safer.
Perfect. Thank you.
So going back to some of the basics that we talked about before of just your own privacy and password protection, I think one thing that you're taught from a very young age is don't have the same password for everything. Make sure your passwords are complex. So what are your thoughts on password generator apps like LastPass, who experienced a hack back in, I think, like 2022, or 1Password as like password authentication and protection apps?
So those apps are fantastic, right? Now, one thing I like to point out, everybody looks at the LastPass incident and says, well, these guys were breached and all my passwords were there. A breach can happen to anyone, unfortunately, right? So I don't want to say LastPass is at fault. What I can say when it comes to password hygiene and why they say don't reuse your password is because, let's say, Netflix has an incident and you use your email address and same password for LastPass as you use for your bank. That email address and password are now floating on the dark web, and all they have to do is have your name, know where you bank, and now they have your login there. So that's why changing your passwords across platforms is so crucial. Using the password managers is absolutely one of the best things that you can do, right? I know back in the day, everyone said, don't write your passwords down on sticky notes and put them under your desk. That might be a good idea these days.
You.
However, what I think is really important is having the password manager, making sure that the master password to that is secured and not written anywhere in your phone. Just keep that one to memory. And I think it's safe to trust in the technology. The LastPass thing was a pretty critical vulnerability, but I swear by them. I have absolutely every password in 1Password right now.
I don't know a single one of my passwords except to get into my password manager. So that's about as secure as I can get.
Yes,
Yeah.
I use 1Password as well, so that's why I was interested in your thoughts on it, so thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the only password you need to know. Everything else can live in there.
This is such a fascinating conversation, so thank you all very much. I wanted to share, we focused tonight mostly on ransomware attacks, but since we've sort of broadened the conversation about other kinds of attacks, I wanted to share an incident that happened here at the university that about 5 years ago that underscores the importance of following just standard business protocols and what happens when one doesn't. So someone got an email from the CFO, well, looked like the CFO, and in every respect, I mean, it was very well done, asking for a transfer of funds to a different account. And the account was a bogus account. It looked very legitimate. It looked like, well, we have protocols in place that you're not supposed to do that. The finance team was not supposed to do that. But this person, because it sounded so, it was written in the voice of the CFO at the time. It was the person did it, made the mistake. And it wasn't, also the other thing about that is it wasn't a huge amount of money. We're not talking millions of dollars. It was like $5,000. But again, 5,000, because that in that way it didn't raise, as much suspicion. So that was human error, but it was the kind of human error that one could understand how someone could succumb to that because it was the sort of conversational thing, which made me think of, so I guess that the point there is just reinforced to your teams, especially anybody that touches money. I mean, because nobody's going to send you their password. That's a red flag. But, making a transfer that looks like the kind of normal thing that one would do. So that piece. The other thing is you mentioned deep fakes. I don't think you called it deep fakes, but I'm increasingly impressed with the ability of AI to generate very realistic sounding voices and increasingly images. I mean, it's crazy how fast that's going. And I think that the same thing that happened to UNE in that incident. Now, imagine someone getting a call from me saying, "Listen, do me a favor." Something. If I said, "Go buy," cryptocurrency, and hopefully they'll know that that's not me. But or go buy gift cards or something. That's not me. But I can imagine someone in my voice giving a call and saying, "Listen, could you do me a favor? Grab such and such," and so I guess the point being underscoring business practices that, pretty soon it's going to be like you have to look at the person in the eye, like it's me, really, and to get them to do anything. But anybody want to comment on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I can say just as best practice, we always encourage, if you're dealing with finances anywhere from $100 to $100,000, pick up the phone. If anyone's getting frustrated because it's taking longer because you want to validate, that's a different problem. Because again, the time it's going to take to answer the phone, say, is this you? What's my dog's name, right? Like validate it. That's going to be a lot shorter than trying to recoup whatever money goes out. And I think something else is encouraging the team to speak up if this ever happens. So you hear about it a lot where, like it happens with grandparents all the time. Something will happen. They're super embarrassed. They don't want to say anything. So they don't. And then, you find out weeks, years later, whatever it is, or people are afraid, I'm going to get fired because I made a mistake. And I think just you have to encourage your team to speak up, and mistakes do happen, right? So I think to some of the points you made, it's encouraging the team to talk about these things and be open about it, and that's how you're going to improve.
Absolutely. And, I actually just spoke to a previous client who went through a fraudulent fund transfer matter, and we were just catching up, and she mentioned that they implemented a code word. Every time there's a financial transaction internally, it truly is a safe word. And they say that, and that's how they know that we can safely transfer these funds because, again, the deep fakes are getting very real. It's easy to get a phone call from your CFO that's not your CFO, so.
Okay, everybody, it's Apple Crisp. Okay, remember, don't tell anybody. Right.
All right. Well, this concludes the Q&A portion of the program. In terms of most interesting question, it's a tough one, but we're going to give it to our buddy back there. I'm not sure what your name is, but in the black jacket. That was a great question. So you get the beautiful bouquet, thanks to CFC Response. Thank you, CFC Response, for that. And if you weren't able to get your questions answered, our panelists are going to be hanging around for a little bit after the event, so feel free to approach them directly and ask your questions. Just want to thank all of our panelists for coming up here today, sharing their stories, educating us on the realities of ransomware attacks and how to prevent something like this from happening. Big thank you to the University of New England for hosting this event, this beautiful venue, putting all of this together. And can we please get a round of applause for the panelists up here, please? And want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I hope you've left this session with an enhanced perspective on the realities of what a ransomware attack looks like and how to prevent something like this from happening. I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and thank you again for joining us.